Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the law, the news, the Constitution, and correct discussion to your home each month. Tonight, I'm James Barrett, and with Mark Malachowski, we're here to talk about the subjects of the day. Mark, what are we talking about first?
Well, if we're going to be politically correct, we have to talk about IRS Supervisor Lois Lerner, who corrected the elections, made sure that everything went well. And she got subpoenaed. She went before Congress, and she took the fifth again. Now, there was some confusion. Some people thought she wasn't going to take the fifth, and it's kind of complicated what happened.
Well, we do know that Lois Lerner, about 8 months ago, did go before Congress. Darrell Issa runs the committee.
Right.
And she gave a statement, and we covered this a little bit before, and then took the fifth, which technically means she's not allowed to she waived her rights to take the fifth. But because Congress really doesn't have the criminal enforcement power that they would need to prosecute her, for her waiving the fifth, then they've left her kind of alone. But what is the most shocking part about this, Mark, is they allowed her to go home with all her emails. They've been paying, she's been on paid leave, and not one email's been presented from her or from her department until, I believe, 1 week ago. This is after they asked for it over a year ago. So how can we explain that?
Well, I think what happened here is that the Congress, the executive branch pretty much has done a end run around the Congress. And at this point, the Congress has kind of been dissolved. We have an executive branch that is claiming dictatorial executive power over everything, and the Congress is pretty moot.
Well, I do understand that there's 40 plaintiffs in a lawsuit that's being brought by Jay Sokolov, and he actually puts forth 5 questions, only 5 questions that he wants Congress to ask Lois Lerner. And I'm going to read those because it makes sense. What do you know, and when did you know it? Now, that sounds like a pretty broad question, but we're talking about one thing. The 501c4 corporations that were not allowed to become corporations. Nonprofits prior to the 2012 election. We have to look at this because the 2010 election had a lot of Tea Party groups that were able to fund Tea Party candidates that pushed the Republicans into power in the House of Representatives. But in 2012, literally almost 500 Tea Party or conservative corporations were not allowed to be passed because of somebody stopping them at the IRS so they couldn't do fundraising.
Well, if you look at the report, report that the Congress did, they said, well, not only did they pick several hundred, conservative parties and basically disfranchise, and this is not in the congressional report, but that disenfranchised between 10 and 30 million voters, which easily sways the election. So the election is like, it's as good as any of Stalin's unanimous elections or any other rigged election. So I mean, president in that terms that, yeah, you know how to rig an election, so now we'll call you El Presidente. But also, once Lerner started getting this pushback, that she went ahead and said, well, we better go and harass a small number of liberal groups.
Oh, liberal ones, yes.
Just to cover our tracks here.
Yeah, but there was only like about 6 or 7 of those,
well,
right?
a small percentage, 3 or 4 or 5%. But that was, and if you look at the emails that were revealed, it's like this could be big trouble, and the Tea Party is a big danger. And Lois Lerner's been rigging elections for her whole
Lois
career.
Lerner goes back to the Clinton days, so she's been around a long time as kind of a political henchman, taking care of electorates in a variety of ways.
Right, threatening people, blackmailing people,
because of positions she always seems to get into.
Right.
But what about this question about 2 people out of Cincinnati stopped it all? I know that's been debunked in those emails.
Well, the Cincinnati people didn't go along with that. And then I think what happens, ISA has kind of met his match here. You know, because I don't think Isa's really, has he ever been a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor?
No, Darrell Isa's claim to fame was that he had a company that sold a lot of car alarms. That's how he got started.
So he's not really a prosecutor, and also Congress has pretty much been stripped of his authority at this point. You know, we're pretty much in, you know, a regime that's a despotic regime. So Congress has no power. You know, the press pretty much, you know, went along with Obama and said, like, oh, the Congress can't control purse strings anymore, right?
Right.
And so that they rolled over, and they could have charged Lerner with contempt a year ago, right?
Right, and they still did.
But no, but they rolled over.
And well, what's interesting is that the second question that Sokolov, and by the way, these questions are being driven home in the lawsuit that Sokolov is carrying for those 40 plaintiffs. Do you know about the politically driven call to investigate conservatives? Now, that sounds like a simplistic question, but when you're talking about 40 plaintiffs that have all been shut down, where they had the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, they had the DEA, they'd have the EPA, all investigating these people as collateral investigations to the same people that are trying to set up the 501(c)(4)s, nonprofits. Then you start looking at this as a wider kind of conspiracy that's really going on.
Well, Caligula, who did Caligula have? He had his the Imperial Guards. Who were they? Anyway, Caligula had his Imperial Guards, right?
Right.
And, you know, rumor has it that he became emperor or you know, Caesar by having his uncle smothered.
Right.
But he didn't really do it himself. Maybe the Imperial Guards did it, but maybe he gave some hints to the Imperial Guards. And here people are saying, well, maybe Obama gave some hints, like he did several speeches that anybody that's a 504C is, you know, because the Citizens United is a bad thing, and, you know, that's a terrible ruling. And so he sent out the signals that just like...
Well, you realize that ruling was something that disrupted a lot of what was going on, because up until that point,
the unions were the only ones.
The unions were the only groups that were running the show
and you gotta
on large organizations.
And you got to understand, the unions are basically taxpayer money.
And because the largest unions now are actually unions that are working for the government.
So this is taxpayer money that goes to fund a certain regime, and then like private money is bad.
Bad private money.
Because that wasn't taken when, well, you got to understand that taxpayer money is taken from people by force. The IRS works by a barrel of a gun, right? You don't give money to the IRS because you like them, because you want to. You give them because they have the force of arms.
They can come and take your money.
Not only that.
They can come and take your property. They can levy your wages. They can garnish your wages. Guns. They can do all of that.
But they have guns, right? That government has guns, and you have to pay them, right? And so people say, well, we should share, we should be nice. But on the other hand, have a gun pointed at your head. So you really ought to share. So these guys are in a situation where, you know, they're running by pure force. Constitutionally, ethically, politically, no real credibility, no real justification at all. Pure brute force. So at this point, the country is run by brute force of arms.
Well, this would, without getting too dramatic about this, but you have to realize the power play that's going on right now is all out of Chicago. This goes back to the Daley regime and the gangsterisms that's gone on in Chicago. And I hate to summarize in vagueness, but the fact of the matter is, this is politics by gangsterism.
But they have badges.
But they have badges, and they have guns,
and
they have the power to stop the vote and change the vote. And what
they are the vote. They are the vote.
Well, picture this.
They are the vote.
I do know that some of the emails talk about the threat of the Tea Party,
right,
and what it could do in the 2012 election,
right.
And what's another 5 to 6 million people that should have voted that didn't vote because they were disenfranchised by the IRS. How would have that election gone?
But it might have been 10 to 30 million.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to our next subject, because I got to tell you, Lerner back.